Hey everyone, and welcome to SkillCapped's patch 1.04 rundown and tier list for Valorant. We have a lot to go over with 4 different agents receiving buffs and nerfs. Viper is getting a big overhaul of her abilities, and the classic pistol is receiving some tuning. As always, we consulted with the top players and coaches to help break down exactly what these changes mean, along with a detailed tier list of what the best agents in the game are right now. But before we jump into it, make sure that you're subscribed with the bell icon on to stay up to date with the meta and get premium guides with one goal in mind, helping you become a better player. Alright, I'm really excited to get into this, starting with the agent changes. So as we all know by now, Viper has been seriously underperforming, considered by many to be the weakest agent in the game. Well, Riot is looking to put an end to this with some pretty massive buffs to her abilities. Viper is having the max time outside of her ult before it collapses increase from 5 seconds to 12. You can now hold the ability key to drop her ult early. Enemies in Viper's ult will also have their minimap obscured, similar to when Omen uses his ultimate, and do not provide minimap detection to their allies. And finally, enemies in Viper's ult will now have a brighter red glow at the edge of Viper's near sight. Wow, these are actually pretty big. First, with Viper being allowed outside of her ultimate for 7 seconds longer, it's going to open up so many more plays for her. Before this change, you were essentially forced to stay in your ultimate, which made it a lot easier to predict where you'd be. Additionally, having the enemy's minimap now obscured is great, but we think far more important is the fact that it does not provide minimap detection to their allies. This means that Viper can now stealthily kill someone in her ultimate, and the enemy team won't know where that came from except for sound cues. These are some fantastic buffs to Viper's ultimate and will definitely address some of the issues that it has. However, it doesn't stop here. The next Viper buff is absolutely insane. The decay from her poison is being increased from 10 to 15 from all sources. And after exiting Viper's smoke, enemy decay sustains for 2.5 seconds before starting to fade. Viper has 3 abilities that apply decay: her smoke, wall, and ultimate. Each of these will now decay the enemy's health 50% faster. On top of this, enemies will retain the decayed damage for 2.5 seconds before starting to fade. You have to realize that this stacks with the previous buffs, making her ultimate even more powerful. Now, even though these changes are pretty hype, they were absolutely needed. One of Viper's core issues was that her poison smoke simply wasn't punishing enough, decaying too slowly, and players quickly regenning back up after exiting. However, there's still one more Viper buff to go over, which has to do with her fuel. Having both Poison Cloud and Toxic Screen active does not consume additional fuel beyond the cost of having one active. Some of you probably don't realize just how impactful of a buff this really is, but trust me, Viper mains are rejoicing. When executing an attack as Viper, you're almost always using these 2 abilities in tandem, and boy did you feel it. Your poison would disappear faster than my teammates when I'm entry fragging. Essentially, this buff will double the duration of her smoke and wall when executing an attack. Now, those of you who have watched our last tier list know that we placed Viper at the bottom in the D tier. So the real question is, are these buffs enough to rise her out of it? And yes, we do think this will be enough, but it won't be anything too crazy. She'll likely be a C tier champion, possibly even B tier on certain maps. Her core issues though still haven't been addressed. Her ultimate is still very situational, and her main purpose, which is vision blocking, is a very oversaturated role, having to compete with Omen and Brimstone, which are far easier to play and still more powerful. Don't get us wrong though, these buffs are fantastic and should make her strong enough to avoid having to rework her entire kit in the near future. Alright, moving on, we have a Raze nerf. Now, we knew a Raze nerf was coming and that it was likely to her ultimate, as we found out from Morello, the lead character designer, in our weekly news roundup. Many speculated it would be tuning the damage, possibly making the AoE radius smaller, forcing the player having to be more accurate with her rocket launcher. Surprisingly though, this is not the case. They're actually increasing her ultimate cost from 6 to 7 points. And this is a pretty smart change. Raze will still pretty much feel the exact same way to the players that main her, while those playing against her will simply interact with that super frustrating ultimate less often. You also have to realize that although one ult point doesn't seem like much, you'll really feel the effects over the course of an entire game. You can imagine a scenario where you only get 2 ults off during each half instead of 3, ending up with 4 Raze ults over the course of the entire game instead of 6, a 50% decrease. So yeah, this will definitely add up. That being said, spoiler alert, we still think she'll be an S tier agent, but instead of being at the top of the S tier, she's more towards the bottom. Next up, we have some really interesting Brimstone changes. He's getting a similar nerf to Raze with his ultimate cost changed from 6 to 7 points. Additionally, his stim beacon will no longer buff enemies and no longer show its effect radius to enemies as well. Not going to lie, kind of have mixed feelings about this one. I definitely understand making enemies no longer benefit from the buff. Its radius is pretty big, and with how closed in Valorant maps can be, made it relatively easy for enemies to get inside the radius and gain the benefits from it. However, I kind of like that it showed its effect. It let you mind game opponents by throwing it in a place you weren't actually hiding in order to trick them. I just feel like it lowers the skill ceiling on the ability. It's now pretty much awesome in all situations. Enemies can't benefit from it or see it, so there's no reason not to use it before you get into a fight. Overall, we actually think this is such a big buff to Brimstone that it actually outweighs the ultimate nerf, resulting in a net buff to the agent this patch. A bit strange considering that Brimstone is currently a top tier pick in pro play and on most maps considered a mandatory pickup. What do you guys think though? Did Riot miss the mark on this one, or are we just reading too much into it? Let us know in the comment section below, as we'd love to hear your thoughts. Cypher is also receiving a minor buff. Wait, am I reading this right? Cypher's Cyber Cage can now be picked up during the buy phase. Okay, so maybe not a crazy buff, more of a quality of life change, but considering in the last pro tournament Cypher's pick rate was at 95%, finally dethroning Sage as the highest picked agent, you can understand us being a bit apprehensive about any buffs to him. To be honest though, this change was probably necessary. It will help newer Cypher players a ton who have yet to master all the lineups, since if they mess up his cage before the round starts, they get another chance at placing it where they wanted it. That will do it for the agent changes, but it only gets more interesting as the classic pistol is getting some fascinating changes, most of which are being called bug fixes. They fixed a bug where running inaccuracy on the right click was much higher than intended. They also fixed a bug where jumping had no inaccuracy penalty. Running spread is now changed from 3.4 to 2.1. This means the right click is now more accurate than it was before when running. Jumping spread is being changed from 1.9 to 2.3, so it's now less accurate. And the walking spread is changed from 1.9 to 1.95. In addition to this, they added 10% bonus accuracy when crouching and stationary. So is anyone else picking up a pattern here? In a previous patch, the Bucky received almost the exact same treatment where the right click had identical bugs. And just like in that case, I don't think any of the player base even realized these were bugs and instead thought this is how the weapons were intended to be. When it comes to the pistol meta, at the start of Valorant, pros were massively favoring the Ghost. It wasn't until pro players realized how strong the classic pistol's right click was did we start to see Ghosts picked up less often. With that being said though, when you dive into the numbers of all of these changes, it's actually looking like a net buff to the gun. The classic pistol's running spread was 3.4, that's insanely inaccurate considering the jumping spread was 1.9, almost twice as accurate. However, running spread is now reduced to 2.1, very close to the previous jumping accuracy. What this means is that it's going to make running and right-clicking with the classic pistol feel nearly twice as accurate as before. So overall, when using the classic pistol, the right-click should be just as powerful, if not more so, which is good as the right-click on the classic is kind of what's keeping it from being one of the worst guns in the game. Next up, we have some quality of life changes to the game. The HUD and UI are having the previous weapon stat text box in the pre-round shop replaced with an easier to compare graphical representation of stats. In addition to this, the observer minimap vision cones are now colored by team. And one change I'm really happy to see in this patch is that they're adjusting the Elder Flame skin volume. I don't know if any of you used the operator from that skin line, but you literally couldn't hear footsteps. The sound effects from the gun were just that loud. They look to address this, having adjusted the volume on the Elder Flame operator equip animation. They also fixed a bug that would cause the volume to stack if you spam equipped the operator. Enemy footsteps now properly duck cosmetic sound effects. This means that enemy footsteps will always lower the volume of the skin sound effect that are not important to gameplay. This is like the flame whooshes, the dragon roar, etc. Additionally, the Elder Flame melee inspect animation now has sound effects for level 1 and 2. We'll also be receiving some performance updates that should help eke out a few extra FPS when you're playing. There are also a slew of different bug fixes, but instead of going over all of them, we've highlighted the most important ones you should know about. Reyna is having the bug created last patch fixed, where she had to look at soul orbs to activate them and maintain her healing. This has been reverted back to previous behavior of patch 1.02. This is fantastic and kind of made Reyna nearly unplayable last patch. They also fixed the Brimstone one-way smokes where you could see enemies through the top of it while they couldn't see you. They fixed a martial bug where the weapon maintained accuracy while walking. This one was a bit of a surprise. We definitely thought this was a feature of the martial, turns out it was a bug all along. And finally, they fixed issues with some translucency effects being one frame behind, such as Jett's dash. Hopefully this helped fix the problem where Jett dashes then gets killed in her previous location despite not being there. Alright, now for what a lot of you are really here for, the tier list. This tier list aims to break down what are considered the best and worst picks currently at both the professional level and high level solo queue. So with that out of the way, let's jump straight into the S tier. And at the top, we have to give it to Cypher. He's quickly become the most picked agent in the pro scene, and we can definitely understand why. You see, most agents actually have a unique problem in Valorant, where their power level can vary widely based on the map that they're played on. Cypher is unique in that he doesn't have that problem, being a must pick up on literally every single map. One of his biggest strengths though is how he can hold sites by himself when usually it'd take 2 players. This can free up a teammate to rotate off and stack a different part of the map. At the same time, it even opens up opportunities for Cypher to rotate early, leaving a site completely empty and relying on his tripwires, cages, and camera to help spot and delay any push to that empty site. Next, in the S tier, to probably no one's surprise, is Sage. Again, another agent that is a must pick on every single map. She offers an almost identical strength to Cypher, with the ability to solo hold sites, freeing up teammates to rotate around the map more. Additionally, she can also use her wall to not only delay pushes, but also free herself up to rotate, leaving the wall behind so that if any enemies destroy it, her team is notified where they are and can rotate back. However, one core difference is that Sage's ultimate is way more powerful than Cypher's. In fact, we'd go so far to say that Sage's ultimate is probably the best in the game right now. Not only can rezzing a teammate completely change the outcome of a round, but it also has powerful economic implications, resulting in a teammate saving their gun and not having to rebuy heading into the next round. And lastly, in the S tier, we have Raze. Even with the nerf to her ult charges, we still think she's the best fragger for straight hard carrying games. This status has been proved for a while now, with her being the go-to pickup for pro players when they want to stomp opponents. However, this comes with one caveat: she is weak on certain maps. If you're on maps like Bind and Split, then she is a must pick. She'll absolutely dominate with the tight corridors, setting up all of her AoE damage. However, if you're on Ascent or Haven, she's no longer S tier, so you may want to consider a backup pick to add to your agent pool for when you get these maps. Moving on to the A tier, where we have a few staples and a few surprises. First, let's get Brimstone out of the way. He was already bordering S tier with how much of a must pick he is. His smokes are simply the strongest in the game when it comes to executing on sites. And with the operator meta in full swing, where defenders are just holding angles with the one-shot cannon, without those smokes, you're pretty much dead to rights. Although his ultimate is receiving a nerf, with it costing 1 extra point, the stim beacon buffs more than make up for it. The only reason he isn't in the S tier is that Omen keeps rising in power and can be a good alternative. In addition to this, the Viper buffs mean that Viper is now an actual viable alternative for the vision denying role on some maps. Still, he's pretty much a must pick on every single map except for Split, where he's a bit weaker, especially on defense due to the design of the map, and where we see alternative options such as Omen and Viper much more frequently replace him. Next, in the A tier, we have Omen. Again, this has to do with the fact that having someone on your team with vision denial is mandatory in the current operator meta when on attack. You can think of Omen as the better solo queue pickup for this role than Brimstone, while Brimstone is typically more powerful in a coordinated team environment. The main reason for this is Omen's paranoia. With Brimstone, you're often throwing down smokes, then waiting for your entry fraggers to follow up and move in off of them. In solo queue, that can result in you waiting for so long that your smokes actually expire. Omen alleviates this specific solo queue problem by letting you not only set up your smokes, but then also entry fragging if you need to with your paranoia. Not to mention that his teleport helps set up more aggressive plays, letting you net kills that otherwise wouldn't be possible with Brimstone. Another weakness of Omen though, compared to Brimstone, is that his power level varies a bit more depending on the map. He specifically has an issue with Bind, where the map is so small that you get hit with a lot of fast pushes, so stalling abilities such as Brimstone's Molly becomes much more powerful, something that Omen lacks. Next, in the A tier, we have the Swiss Army knife of Valorant, Phoenix. If you're more of a solo queue player and are sick of having to rely on your teammates, then he's definitely your guy. He's probably the most consistent entry fragger in the game, and is a lot more straightforward than someone like Raze, where you have to be a bit fancier to entry frag. With Phoenix, either throw the flash and then swing, or simply ult, bonus points if a teammate pushes behind you. The fact that Raze got a minor nerf this patch also helps his standings, given that they both compete for a similar spot in a team composition. Overall, a very consistent and versatile agent that you won't be disappointed for picking up as your main. And lastly, in the A tier, we have a new face, Jett. Jett has been seeing an increase in power ever since they buffed her smoke duration to 7 seconds from 3. However, that's only one part of the picture. The other thing you have to realize is that we're in a heavy operator meta at the moment. And this massively benefits Jett, who is without a doubt the best agent when it comes to opping. Her ability to take a shot, then dash to safety is just so useful, not to mention that she can throw smokes to then dissuade the enemy team from trying to push her. On top of this, even if they do try to push you, her ultimate actually makes a great backup weapon for close quarters, with her right click essentially being a one-shot kill up close. That being said, she does work best on maps with a lot of verticality due to her updraft letting her hold off angles with an operator, the best being Haven. Moving on, we have the B tier agents starting with Sova. Now, Sova has slowly become a must pick in pro play. We often see a core team composition of Cypher, Sage, Brimstone, and Sova, with the 5th pick being situational. And he would be higher on this list if he didn't have such a high skill requirement combined with a need for good teammates. For example, his owl drone is absolutely godlike when it comes to pushing sites, but that's only the case if you have a teammate following behind it. Otherwise, it ends up just being a waste of an ability. Sova is all about gathering intel that lets you rotate faster around the map and change the odds in your favor. However, considering that it seems you'd be lucky if your teammates even check their minimap once a round in solo queue, he's not exactly super consistent in that environment. Essentially, if you're solo queuing, he probably drops down to a C tier pick, but if you're in a pre-made, he can be an A tier pickup. That's why we've decided to take the average and place him in the B tier. Next in the B tier, we have Breach. Now don't get us wrong, Breach is actually an amazing agent in the right hands, but for whatever reason, the player base finds him pretty difficult to master. Additionally, he has one of the lowest pick rates. I mean, how often do you actually run into a Breach main in your games? His flashes are absolutely amazing, but that's kind of all that he has going for him. His fault line and ultimate require your teammates to actually follow up and be coordinated with these abilities. Again, something not exactly found in solo queue, making him inconsistent. We've even been seeing his power level dip in pro play, where a lot of teams are preferring to pick up Phoenix to fill the flashing position. And that's simply going to be even more true for the average player, where Phoenix is more consistent and self-reliable. Overall, Breach is an agent with a ton of potential, but his true power is only ever unleashed in a coordinated team environment while being overshadowed by Phoenix otherwise. And lastly, in the B tier, we have Reyna. Fantastic in a solo queue environment, but her pick rate has absolutely plummeted in pro play. In many ways, Reyna is essentially a more inconsistent version of Phoenix. They can both blind the opponent while also being able to self-heal. However, Phoenix doesn't need to get kills to heal himself, and he also has his firewall, which makes him more useful in a variety of different situations. On top of this, Phoenix ult is kind of just straight up better than Reyna ult. I'm sure many of you Reyna players have popped your ult, run in, and had that attack speed increase actually make it more difficult to control your spray, causing you to be more inaccurate than if you had never ulted in the first place. Not to mention that Reyna ult doesn't really do anything if you don't get a kill. Phoenix ult, on the other hand, is much safer. If you lose the gunfight, you're still alive. It also always has a benefit, being that if you don't spot any enemies, that still gives you intel and helps you figure out where the enemy team is. Overall, Reyna has similar issues to Breach, in that she's being overshadowed by Phoenix. And lastly, in the C tier, we have Viper. Despite her buffs, she's still at the bottom of the list, but at least she's not in the D tier anymore, so she's got that going for her. But in all seriousness, this is just a prediction, and at a minimum, we think she'll be a C tier agent with the buffs. We wouldn't be surprised though if she ends up being B tier once more players pick her up and start getting better at her. One thing you should be aware of though is that Viper's power level can vary widely between maps. Her best map by far is Split, and she's likely an A tier agent on that map. Bind comes in a close second, and she's at minimum a B tier agent on that map. However, she's still going to be pretty weak on Ascent and Haven. In the case of Ascent, it is the newest map, so there is room for her to become more powerful as players find better and better lineups for her. However, we're going to be honest with you, at this point you're kind of trolling if you pick Viper on Haven. That extra sight makes her really weak on defense, as she works best when she can lock down an area with a one-way smoke. Having to rotate fast just isn't her strong suit. At the same time, her attack is atrocious on Haven, mainly due to how difficult her lineups are. You'll have to get into some weird spots and learn very specific lineups to land your Poison Cloud in the right locations. Meanwhile, Brimstone will be laughing at you hitting 2 buttons to get the perfect smoke in 3 different spots. So even with these buffs, if you're a Viper main, you may want to save yourself the headache and get a backup pick for Haven. Alright, so what do you think of the Viper changes? Do you think this will finally be enough to make her viable? If not, what changes would you make to help fix her? Let us know in the comment section below, and while you're down there, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay up to date with the meta and get premium guides with one goal in mind, helping you become a better player. We here at SkillCapped want to thank you for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.